welcome to a new edition of Special News Jungle in Conversation with me, Tania Tirraoro. Today, my co-interviewer is our columnist, Matt Keer. Hello, Matt.
Hi, are you all right?
Yeah, thanks for lending a hand. Now, Matt specialises in SEND statistics and accountability, which is why he's here today, as our guest is Ofsted SEND Specialist Lead Inspector, Nick Whittaker. Hello, Nick.
Hi, hello, and hello, Matt. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Did I get your title right?
So my title is, I'm one of Her Majesty's Inspectors, and I'm Ofsted's Specialist Advisor for SEND.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us today. Now, we've got a lot of questions sent in to us, so we've had to be selective over what we can fit into the time. So apologies if your question didn't make it in. But happily, Nick has said that he's happy to do more than one of these SNJ in conversations. Isn't that right, Nick?
It is. Yeah,
it is right.
Excellent.
Excellent.
It is now.
I'm not making it up.
Thanks.
So maybe we should do it in kind of themed in future, so we can just look at particular themes that people can send in questions about. So today we're going to be looking at the recent interim report that Ofsted did about SEND inspections and other aspects during the pandemic, and what the future will look like for inspections as well, particularly because of the continuing COVID situation. So first, let's have an overview. It's been 6 years since the SEND reforms. Nick, what and how much difference do you think that Ofsted and the Care Quality Commissions made in improving the lot of children with and young people with SEND since 2014? And what do you think they need to build on and to improve in the years to come?
Okay. I think I'd start by saying, Tania, that the programme of various SEND inspections, the Ofsted CQC inspections, I think there's an argument that it's the first systematic look at how the SEND system in local areas is working in England, certainly since the 2014 reforms, and it was mandated in those reforms, as you know. But arguably over a much longer period of time since the first SEND code of practice, and perhaps even longer that since the 81 Act. I think I'd say that our inspections have shone a light on how the SEND system is working in England, and that's first and foremost our job as inspectors is to gather, evaluate evidence and report objectively and independently on what we find. But I think I can also see that our findings have featured in other important reports that we've seen being published in recent months and years. So things like the Education Select Committee's recent inquiry, the report that the National Audit Office published. What parents and carers have said to us is that they can see that our inspections have provided some impetus for improvement in the SEND system in local areas. But I think we recognise, and we wrote about this in the evaluation report that we published in July, that impetus for improvement isn't always sustained. It doesn't always continue, and sometimes areas' responses to our findings, and we saw this particularly in our programme of revisits, were short-term rather than long-term actions leading to embedded change and improvement. And as you know, and Amanda Spielman, the Chief Inspector, wrote about this in the commentary that she published on the 9th of July. The commission that we've received for the new programme of area SEND inspections is a commission for a continuous programme of inspection, a commission which has made it clear that has made the importance of understanding and learning about the experience of children, young people and families first and foremost. In particular, understanding the social care contribution to the education, health and care system in an area, but also understanding the quality and integration of important education, health and care services for children and young people with SEND. So I suppose in conclusion, Tania, I would say that our programme of inspections so far, and it's the current cycle of inspections isn't finished yet, has gone some way to achieving our objective of supporting improvement and holding leaders in local partnerships to account, but we can see that there's a lot more to do.
So just a quick follow up on that. In previous Ofsted annual reports, some local area staff have said that the inspections have been useful, even when they haven't quite gone how the local area are inspected, as a way of raising SEND as an issue within departments of children's services. Are local area SEND managers still telling you that, and are they finding that it's become easier to push SEND as an issue within their departments, or does it depend entirely on the area?
That's what came through the evaluation, Matt, and I've just got a summary of the evaluation report in front of me, and again we said a little bit about this in the Chief Inspector's commentary. One of the things that leaders and frontline practitioners in areas said to us is that inspections have raised the profile of SEND, and that SEND was given a higher priority following inspection, and that helped with strategic decision making and planning. They considered themselves to be more accountable for the SEND arrangements in an area across education, health and care in a way that was greater than they had done previously.
Your roving band of inspectors have been on, is it 6 interim visits so far? Not inspections, but actual visits, and you put a report out in the last week or so. What did you make of the sort of information that you gathered? Was there anything that particularly surprised you? Was there any aspect that in subsequent cycles of these visits you want to go back and maybe explore in ways which you couldn't in this cycle?
Were there any surprises? There were several things that I think were we learned that that provide important insights into the impact of COVID-19 on children and young people with SEND and their families, and how the disruption caused by COVID-19 has impacted on frontline practitioners and leaders in local areas. As you know, our approach, not just our approach, but a reason for working in the way that we have done, was driven by our developing concerns about this group of children and young people. And that was informed by a whole range of things. The Disabled Children's Partnership report, Left in Lockdown, your survey, the conversations that we were having with you and others about what has happened day in and day out in their local areas. And much of what we learned from our visits aligns with what has been said previously. So we learned that the withdrawal of essential education, health and care services impacted hugely on children and young people with SEND, but we learned some things about how the loss of informal support from family and friends had amplified the difficulties that children and young people and families had experienced, adding to them feeling isolated and in some cases abandoned. What families told us is that things got harder for them. Things have got harder for them as the pandemic has progressed. We learned some things about the way that services have adapted their support for children, young people, and families, and we heard some very positive examples and some very warm words about how individual practitioners and professionals have gone the extra mile to help and support families. But what was striking about that, Matt, is the wide variation in families' experience. From everything stopped at one end of a continuum to things got a lot better for us during this period at the other end of the continuum, probably experiences at every point in between those two. So going forward, it's going to be important to get some even better insights into what are the factors, what are the things that have contributed to a positive experience and better outcomes, what are the things that have got in the way of that. I think one example of that has come through strongly in the visits is that the quality of pre-existing relationships between families and practitioners and between practitioners looked like it has been a strong determinant of children, young people and families' experience, where they were strong, where there were good relationships, where communication during the period of national restrictions was sustained. That looks like that's helped those leaders, those practitioners, those young people, those families work together to make good decisions about how best to support them during the pandemic. And where that wasn't there, and where families were more vulnerable, more isolated, less connected with those services at the outset, that's amplified the things that weren't working well for them before the pandemic.
And speaking at a broad level, would you say the local area's self-evaluation of the challenges and opportunities and how well placed they were to move forward from here, generally speaking, how accurate do you think that was? It wasn't something that necessarily came out directly in the interim visit report.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Matt. I think what areas would say themselves was that that the opportunity to participate in this visits program was really welcome. The opportunity to stop, reflect on everything that had taken place in the preceding 7, 8 or so months. You know, what has been a uniquely challenging period in many of those colleagues' lives was really valued. The opportunity for my colleagues in Ofsted and CQC to work collaboratively and supportively with those people to really understand with them how this disruption has impacted on children, young people and families was welcome. The opportunity to think about what was working well and what needed to be better was valued. And as you'd expect in every area, we're able to identify several things that were that had worked well, but I also think we're very clear about the things that needed to be better, the things that are continue to be difficult, that need to be addressed going forwards. And so I think the balance is both ways, Matt. In some cases, what we'd learned from listening to parents and carers, young people in a small number of cases, listening to the practitioners who are working day in and day out with those families. In some
how
cases,
do you make sure those families that you do speak to are representative? Because I know that you had a panel to choose, but how do you know that the families you were offered to choose from were not families who had better experiences?
I think we did a couple of things to try and mitigate that risk, Tania, and you know from the discussion that we had in the run up to that we needed to think very carefully about that. One of those ways was, in addition to the families we selected for the case studies, which I think is 28 in total across the first 6 visits, we also ran some online surveys for parents and carers and for young people over the age of 16. What we were able to do was hold up examples of what we'd learned from the parents and carers who who were involved in the case studies against what we'd learned from that bigger sample of parents and carers. And I think that's where some of the richest learning for us and for area leaders was. Why is it, for example, why is it that this family have had a very positive experience, whereas this family are telling us that things really didn't work for them? What was it that contributed to that either working or not working? And there were several occasions where having read the summary notes and looked at the report that we published on Tuesday, that I can see that that's fed through very clearly into our findings.
One of the things that has come out from the pandemic of people children going back to school is that some children haven't been able to go back to school. So, and of course, Ofsted are looking quite closely at Offrolling. Not that the two are the same, but should you also be investigating why parents feel they have to home educate or ask for EOTAS, that's education other than at school packages? And it's particularly important given how some children thrived being home educated. You know, what is going on in schools that is making them so unhappy, and also because some haven't been allowed back in September. I mean, as we record this today, only today, the DfE has put out updated guidance for children with AGPs, with tracheostomies. That's taken them over half a term to do it, but still so many of those children are not at school.
Yeah, and actually that links to the second part of Matt's questions, which what are some of the things that we need to get better insights into in the remainder of the programme of these visits. And if we just pick that up very briefly, because they do link together. As you know from our conversation on Monday, we want to make sure that in the sample of case studies, we really make sure that we get a fix on the experience of 16 to 25-year-olds. We want to make sure that we understand that how the restrictions and how things like changes to the curriculum, the restrictions on things like workplace experience and learning, community-based learning, transitions onto further education into the workplace are impacting particularly on those young people. But the second thing that we talked about on Monday, which links to your question, Tania, is about those children, young people with SEND who haven't returned to education. I'm sure you and the people watching and listening today have got the same picture that I've got with the numbers and how that compares with children, young people who don't have a special need or a disability, and it's concerning. I think we've got some insights into the reasons why, into the factors from our area SEND visits, from our visits to schools in recent weeks. And as I've already said, it looks like the quality of communication and the relationship between practitioners, children, young people, parents and carers during the pandemic has been a really significant influence, and perhaps one of those areas where some children, young people have benefited from being doing their learning in smaller groups, for example, accessing more adult support in some contexts, for example. But I do, as you say, Tania, I can see that some children, young people have benefited from time at home. Parents and carers have told us that. But in seeing that, we can't lose sight of the fact that it hasn't worked so well for many children, young people, and it has been difficult, if not impossible, to make the adaptations that are required for them to work and learn successfully. And I also think we need to keep our eye on the fact that what may be working now for a child or young person, or appear to be working now for a child or young person, may not be what is right for them in helping them to prepare for their life as a young adult and as an adult in the community where they're going to live and work, and as you know, those things need to be very finely balanced. In relation to home education, which again we spoke about on Monday, didn't we? This is something that not only parents and carers have told us about, but leaders in local areas have told us about as well. And certainly, when I reflect on that myself from my own inspection experience, there are at least 2 local areas that I have inspected where that has emerged as a real concern, and not just in relation to children and young people who already have education, health and care plans being home educated, but also children and young people who have previously been receiving support for a special need or a disability being home educated. In the visits that we're going to be carrying out in the coming weeks and months, we want to make sure that we really understand those factors, the things that cause parents and carers to make the decisions that they have.
And I think for me, particularly if it's an unfettered choice, and particularly going forward, whether you as a parent decide that your child might be better off out of school, and that you are able to either provide that education yourself or arrange a suitable package with other supports. I think one of the things I found slightly difficult about some of the commentary from Amanda Spielman is the evidence from school leaders, which portrayed parents keeping children at home as a fairly negative thing, or sometimes it informed by misinformation, fake news. And the sort of information we've been gathering from surveys and what we've seen just by talking to parents is quite often it is a conscious choice once they've seen the drop in anxiety in their children. It seems to me that that there's a disconnect there, and the Education Select Committee, as you know, will be looking in more depth at home education in the month and the next year to come. And it does seem that someone with the right reach needs to connect the dots.
Yeah, I think it's a really key point, Matt. I guess my initial thought on that would be that there is a difference, isn't there, between home education being a positive choice and home education being the least worst option
yes.
for a family. I think we'd probably agree about that, wouldn't we?
Oh yeah.
Well, they have no option.
I can also see, Matt, that, and I'm just reflecting on my time as a teacher and a head teacher, perhaps more than anything now, I can also see that children and young people need carefully planned opportunities to transfer and generalizing what they're learning in functional ways in the home, in the communities where they live, in the places where we would want them to work and be visible and active and included. And actually, I can see some of the examples that I've heard about recently where that's worked really well is where that's been facilitated. I guess and it's why I made the point that I made about equality here, because what I don't want to lose sight of the fact is, so what about the children and young people who don't have access to the kind of help and support they would need to do that successfully?
Okay, that's probably a good segue on to the next thing we want to talk about. One of the things when we've talked to you previously, and certainly in some of the interim visit information, is that for these visits, for whatever inspection process might emerge in the months and years to come, that from your position in Ofsted, you want to be able to bring out more clearly and sharply lived experiences of young people, children with special educational needs and disabilities, and bring those out more clearly within the sort of inspections and the written product that comes from them. How do you think what are the best steps to take to make that happen? And are there ways in which families and people listening to this podcast can help with that?
I think there are multiple ways, Matt, is the quick answer, and I think we start from the point that we can't do this as well as we want to do this without that. To be frank, I mean, I think, you know, in my time as a HMI and in the job that I have now as specialist advisor, two examples of that have really stuck in my mind are a little bit of work that Eleanor Rutherford and I did a year or so ago with Send Youth Voice in the Wirral, a young people's stakeholder group, and we, ahead of looking at the experience of 24 children, young people with special need or disability in mainstream primary schools last year, a piece of work that we've done the field work for, but not published the findings of yet. We had an incredibly insightful time with this group of young people, really trying to understand from their experience how we can make sure that when we involve them in any activity, whether it's research or inspection, that we do it in a way which genuinely gives them an opportunity to participate. And it won't surprise you, Matt, that my concern is always going to be, how do we get it right for those children and young people and parents and carers who would find it most difficult to participate? It's absolutely essential that we give them a voice. We work out how to do it. So doing this together is a really important part of what we do going forward. I have to say that some of those young people had been involved in a project which was looking at how children and young people with social, emotional, and mental health needs were supported in that area, and they'd done it themselves. And you know, having talked to them about what they'd learned, I think it would have taken a group of adults a lot longer, if at all, to get to the same understandings. And another very, very sobering example, Matt, again, as you know, in the run-up to developing this programme of interim visits, we looked very hard at what was being learned about the impact of COVID-19. And one of the reasons for setting up this process in the way that we have done is that we wanted to really give voice to children, young people's experience and to families' experience. And one of the things that I did was I was to look at the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health research digest, a huge list of bits of work that had been done to try and understand the impact of COVID-19. And if I tell you, Matt, that the most insightful piece of work that I read was published by a year 6 pupil in Sheffield, where I live, based on 162 survey responses from 5 to 15-year-olds, then I hope it gives you a sense of why we can see that this is so important. And I'd recommend that anyone who really wants to really wants to look at what people have been learning takes a bit of time to have a look at that research.
Yeah, it sounds like a really positive, worthwhile thing. How is it possible to encourage young people to come forward with their experiences directly?
The approach that we've taken to engaging with young people on the Area Send revisits, where we put much more time into planning and preparing for that before we go out on site, has been more productive, more insightful. That young people have told us that they felt more confident about engaging with us in those conversations. We're at the beginning of this, and I'm determined that it is not going to be an afterthought, but something that we work on right from the beginning of the development process for the new framework.
That sounds good to hear.
Yes, accountability and trust. I mean, it's one of the things in the process that parents really say, concerns them the most. You're talking about getting young people involved, getting parents involved. Would perhaps having an expert parent inspector on the Ofsted team be helpful in eliciting parental views and in questioning local authorities? As of course, they have a different perspective than Ofsted or CQC inspectors.
I mean, as you know, Tania, we and again we set it out in the in HMCI's commentary. We talked about the things that we're going to do to develop the new framework. So we talked about looking at what we've learned from our different inspection remits, and I'm aware and you're aware of inspectorates where is experts by experience the right term, where people are included and involved in that way. We're thinking about what children, young people, families tell us. We're engaging with stakeholders from different parts of the SEND system, whether it's those who represent frontline practitioners or area leaders across education, health and care. I think the point that we're at, Tania, with all of this is, and again, it was set out in the commentary, we're clear about the direction that we want to go in with this work, but we are right at the beginning of it. And I think we're at the stage where we're opening up possibilities and thinking about ways of doing this well, but we're not at a point where we're closing those things down or making decisions.
Because I just think, imagine having Matt on your team, for example. I don't think any local authority would get away with anything. No, I think that something like that would
be fluffy too.
No, but I think something like that, having a parent expert by experience, as you say, someone like, I'm not volunteering Matt, but somebody like Matt, if not Matt, would be a really valuable addition. Over to you, Matt.
Okay, it's just on that bombshell. So, I mean, looking, you're talking a bit about the future, and you mentioned thinking about a future framework, but before that, you've got a remit from the Department for Education to get the current cycle done. And part of as I understand it, the process of doing these interim visits, yes, it was to learn how children and young people were faring under lockdown and the pandemic, but it was also, I think, to inform Ofsted's thinking about at what point you actually get back on the horse and start resuming the final 34 or so local area inspections from the first cycle. So it's going to be tricky, I guess, because are you paused now with the visit cycles?
Yeah, so we are paused periodically, and it's our intention to complete the programme of interim visits.
Either virtually or
I mean, that good question, Matt. The first 6 were a mix. Some being carried out face to face on site, some being carried out online, some with a blend. I think the view that we'd take on that is that if we can carry out those visits on site with as much as possible being done face to face, if it can be done safely, and if everyone is happy with working in that way, that would always be our preference. But if we're not able to do that, then we will carry out the visits online. And I think it would be fair to say that it's more important to do that and do it well than not do it at all in this interim period.
And doing the sort of several cycles of those visits would be a necessary precursor to restarting inspections.
Yeah, I think
as far as you can see.
Well, I think as you know, we have distinguished between what we are doing in this interim period, while inspection is paused, and we've made it clear that what we're doing is not
for sure.
is not inspection. Neither is it a substitute for inspection. The purpose of visiting areas is fundamentally to support improvement, but you're absolutely right. It was to get an understanding of how has the disruption caused by this pandemic impacted on children, young people and families. What's it like for frontline practitioners and leaders in areas? And absolutely, we want to use what we have learned through this program of visits to make the decision about when it's right to return to inspection. It's absolutely essential, isn't it, that we're able to inspect local area send arrangements in a way that is fair, and in a way that is valid, and in a way that is reliable. That's essential. It's also essential in that our work both supports improvement and holds area leaders to account. Those are the dimensions of what our inspections are about. And what I hope you can see, what I hope the people listening can see, is that the visits that we've done so far and the visits that we're hoping to do in the coming weeks will provide those insights. But as always, we will continue the conversations that we've been having with you and with other parent and carer stakeholder groups, with other stakeholders, and obviously with our colleagues in CQC and the Department for Education and Government.
Yeah.
Did these visits look at the impact on parents and carers and families? Because one parent sent in a question saying that, given a child who has to go into care because parents can no longer cope because of loss of support, and that will cost not only the state more, but impact on people more than putting the support in would have done.
I think, as always, Tania, some of the most humbling and insightful bits of what I do and what my colleagues do are the things that we learn from our conversations with parents and carers. One of the differences about the approach that we've taken to these interim visits is that we have worked with our social care colleagues in Ofsted. So the visit team has been a education HMI, a social care HMI, and a children's services inspector from CQC. And again, I know that that's important not just for now, but given what we've said about the future of Area Send and wanting to make sure that we really get an understanding of what the C in E, H and C looks like in the Send system. I would say my personal reflection would be that the insights that our colleagues in social care have provided on these visits has added real value. And certainly the dialogue that we've had as HMI and with our colleagues from CQC about how those bits of the Send system are working, what it's like for families, I think have been some of the richest.
Will that become a permanent feature?
So what we've said, what HMCI said in the commentary is that we want to make sure that in the new Send, our new approach to Send inspection, we get a much better understanding of the social care contribution to the education, health and care system, and that came out of the evaluation report as well that we published on the 9th of July. I think we said that area leaders and inspectors commented on the lack of focus on children's social care during area Send inspections. Area leaders pointed out that this meant that one of the main partners in an area was neither able to articulate their contribution nor be held to account.
One of the issues many parents have when they get this final EHCP is that it's actually not very good. So do you select random EHCPs to check for quality rather than just take what you've been offered? And if you do, how do you do that? And at a school level, do you check if EHCPs are actually being carried out?
So in area Send inspections, we do select a sample of education, health and care plans to look at, and we also look at a sample of support plans as well. So for children who have an identified and assessed need, but they don't have an EHC plan. We also look at the information that has contributed to education, health and care assessment. So we look at the quality of the professional advisors. We look at how those professional advisors have been integrated, and we look at associated documents such as reports from periodic reviews as well. We select a sample from things like age, children and young people's primary needs, different types of settings, and then some of those additional characteristics that are set out in the code of practice. So, for example, children who are looked after or have a plan of protection, or live or are educated in a place which is some distance from where they live. But that really looking at the advices and the plans and the review reports only gives us a partial picture. There are things I'm sure you've looked at many plans yourselves, but there are things that you can learn. There are things that you can infer from looking at those advices and plans. But on Area Sen, we visit several settings when we're out on site: schools, early years settings, further education and skills settings. We look at other documents in those schools. We talk to pupils. We talk to parents and carers. We talk to leaders and governors. We find out about their experience of education, health and care assessment planning. And we again, my one of my reflections on that is that those conversations often have a different quality to the conversations that we have for parents and carers in other ways. And I think some of that is because when we're in those settings having those conversations, those parents and carers are talking to us about their children's experience. When the children, young people are talking to us, they're talking about their own experience. So those questions about the ambitions of plans translated into reality, and irrespective of what a process looks like on paper, has it been experienced in that way by that parent and carer? Do they feel like their voice has been heard? Have they been involved in important decision making? Are their hopes and aspirations for their son or daughter's future being understood alongside with the young persons themselves? And I think it's only by having that kind of dialogue that you really understand whether what you see written down is actually experienced in reality by people,
or delivered as a service. Yeah, I mean, as it took me a while to realise that the speech and language therapy in my youngest son's EHCP hadn't materialised for 6 months. And you can track paperwork, and I do it a lot, but unless you're able to go down and talk to the setting and talk in an open manner, you don't get the end-to-end experience necessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Matt, as you know, it's where some of the whole system measures that are in place might give you a view, say, of timeliness from to EHC plans being finalised, but may give you far less insight into quality, either in terms of the quality of any plan or a process, but more importantly, whether from those people's experience it has the person-centred features and qualities that it should.
And then look, I mean, looking really briefly at school inspections. So there's been a framework in place. Is it 2 years now or 1 year?
No, 1 year since
just 1 year?
Last September. Yes, it's new. It might feel like it's been longer, Matt, but it's new.
It's the longest year ever.
Yeah.
And I think parents, when we talk about inspections, ask us a lot why isn't there a separate judgment for the quality of SEND provision? And this was something that obviously came up, and there was opportunities for consultation. There was a bit of research done that didn't, frankly, include a lot of background in SEND. But Ofsted clearly chose not to have a separate judgment on SEND, and it seems to me, at least, that they chose not to make the quality of SEND provision a limiting judgment that would determine maximum or minimum grades. Can you walk people through some of Ofsted's thinking around
absolutely,
around why that's the case?
Yeah, I can. So you're quite right. We do have a new school inspection framework, the EIF, and I guess you would expect me to say this, Matt, but I am going to say it. I see the EIF as a force for good for children and young people with SEND, and you'd probably also expect me to say, but I am going to say that my view is the experience of children and young people with SEND and the progress they make, the outcomes they achieve, feature prominently in the EIF. And I don't think it is an accident, for example, that that the first bullet point in the quality of education judgment area in the EIF says that inspectors will take a rounded view of the quality of education that a school provides to all its pupils, including the most disadvantaged pupils and those with SEND. Paragraph 169. It's the first bullet point in that judgment area, and what I can see is that the EIF and the school inspection handbook sets out how inspectors will gather and evaluate evidence about the experience of children and young people with SEND and the outcomes they're achieving on Section 5 inspections, and in different guidance on Section 8 inspections as well. In terms of grade descriptors, when you look at the quality of education judgment area, what you'll see that the grade descriptors state that the quality of education in a school is likely to be inadequate if pupils with SEND do not benefit from a good quality education. There aren't any separate judgments or grades for SEND in the EIF, but the good and outstanding grade descriptors for quality of education, have very clear criteria. So in the good grade descriptor, pupils with SEND achieve the best possible outcomes. In the outstanding grade descriptor, pupils with SEND achieve exceptionally well. And I think, again, for people who are listening who are perhaps not as familiar with the detail of the EIF, for the quality of education to be judged as outstanding, the school must meet all the criteria in the good quality of education grade descriptor securely and consistently, and those words are written in bold, as well as 4 additional criteria, one of which is pupils consistently achieve highly, particularly the most disadvantaged. Pupils with SEND achieve exceptionally well. Like everything we do, its success has got to be understood in terms of its impact on the experience of children and young people. We're barely 2 terms into this new inspection new inspection framework currently.
So I guess the reason I'm pressing it is, it's almost a cliche within SEND parent circles that we get, you'll have a parent come to you that they can't quite believe how bad the SEND provision is, how difficult it is to work with a particular school, and it'll inevitably end with but I went to this, I got my child to this school because it was outstanding. And a lot of us kind of roll our eyes because they know we know a certain type of school that would have been classed as outstanding under old frameworks, A, might not have been inspected for a very long time, and B, having experienced it myself, the sorts of things that a school believes it has to do under previous frameworks to achieve outstanding tended to be to the detriment of kids like mine. Has the inspectorate found that as it's starting to inspect some of these schools that were formerly outstanding, is there any noticeable weakness in SEND provision, or consequently are turning the other way around? Are there schools that were once in category who may have had quite strong SEND provision who are improving their grades as a result of that?
I think the quick answer to that, Matt, is that it's probably too early to say.
Okay.
I think, and of course, remember that that many of the schools that you are talking about have been exempt from routine inspection for a significant period of time. Yeah. But what you said there about performance measures, I think is really important, and in many ways it exemplifies the shift from the approach to judging quality of education in the previous inspection framework, the common inspection framework, to the approach that we're taking now in the EIF. And it's a shift from looking at those performance measures as the key indicator of the quality of education that a school is providing, to actually looking at the substance of that. And I would always take people to the example of threshold measures, which provide some insights. But I spent a big part of my career as a teacher and head teacher of two schools for children and young people with severe, complex, profound, and multiple learning difficulties, and frankly, the proportion of young people achieving 5 good GCSEs would provide no insight whatsoever into the quality of their experience or their outcomes. So the EIF approach is a different approach, because it starts with gaining an understanding of what this is all building towards, and the extent to which the curriculum, so the framework of what children will learn, what they'll be taught, is building towards, was helping them to learn, to remember, to be able to do things, but it's building towards things that are meaningful and aspirational for them.
And one thing I've noticed, having sort of chewed through a few school reports under the new inspection framework, is one of the things that would drive me nuts was the use of the phrase low ability within Ofsted reports as a particular signifier that of a particular narrow type of academic attainment that did the children it was describing an utter disservice, as well as the professionals that were supporting them well, or maybe not supporting them so well. But it was an utterly unhelpful way to characterize the types of needs that pupils might have, or the types of challenges they faced, and the professionals that supported them. Yeah. So I really hope that type of descriptor has been put in the bin firmly now.
Yeah.
So when we're looking, when you're doing an inspection, do you also look at the annual reviews? How legal the process was, what the timescales were like, because it seems to be up to just individual parents to complain to the LGO if the process hasn't been what it should be. So those parents who don't have the ability to do that, the time to do that, the knowledge to do that, are really at the mercy of their local authority. So how do you look at that within an inspection?
I think the starting point for me would be that the assess, plan, do, review cycle shouldn't stop at the point that an education, health and care plan is finalised, should it? It's the mechanism that drives that continued focus on doing the things that need to be done to support that child or young person's learning and development, and to test whether or not what they're learning is helping them to get closer towards the longer term goals and ambitions that are set out in their plan. I think that education, health and care plans and other kinds of plans are a really important resource for inspectors. They provide really helpful insights into those children, young people's needs and starting points, to the range of support and services that they should and are accessing, and they help inspectors to understand whether what they see through their inspection activities, through their deep dives, are connecting with what they read in those plans. And I've certainly prior to the pandemic, I certainly read in one report where an inspector had identified a really significant concern, because what children were being taught, the way the curriculum was conceived and taught, just didn't match with the things that were identified as being important in those children, young people's plans. In terms of concerns, Tania, what I hear from parents and carers is that they find the routes of redress quite unhelpful and unclear, and it's not always obvious. Even if you look at that great big long table on page whatever in the code of practice, it's not always clear what you do next when something isn't as it should be. I can absolutely see why families are frustrated sometimes with knowing what to do when they want to escalate a concern that they have about their experience or their children's experience.
It was a real struggle to get a workable EHCP from my local area, and it left me with a pretty negative impression. But the quality of meetings we've had with the annual review with local authority officers has been really, really high. As a process, it never gets followed up, and nothing changes, and the paperwork still looks the same. But there's still a quality of discussion, and we all come out of it better able to support our kid, and that's something you won't get from chasing the paperwork necessarily.
No, and an interesting reflection, Matt, in the context of COVID-19 and the different ways that our colleagues in schools are working. And actually not just those in schools, but across education, health and care. And one of the things that we could see from the recent visits that we've done, the 6 visits, was that in some cases, the shift to working online, and I guess people's greater confidence with working online, had actually facilitated better multi-agency working. And it seems to me that as long as we remain mindful of the reality that may not work so well for some people, maybe because they don't have good access to the technologies that we're using, or they feel less confident interacting with people in that way. Then certainly, one of the areas that I went to, what those people were saying was that actually because of the reduction in travelling time, the ability to gather that group of people together for a short period of time, but with a really sharp focus, had really added some value.
You're clearly maybe towards the back end of the queue at the moment, looking with the Care Quality Commission to design a new round of inspections. And am I right in saying you've been given the go-ahead by the Department for Education and Health to go ahead with that?
Yeah, Matt, that's spot on. And again, I just say if anyone wants to get a clear picture of how what we're doing in this interim period, our thinking about returning to routine inspection, our plans for area send inspection in the future, all of that was set out in the 9th of July commentary, which I think, Tania, you wrote a really comprehensive piece on your website. So if anyone has any, if it's unclear how those things fit together.
So this has been a really informative and useful discussion, and we know, as you said earlier, that we'd like to do more of them in the months to come, which would be brilliant. Maybe even a webinar that we could get more people involved in as well. So I'd just like to say thanks to Matt, and I hope you've now got a taste for interviewing and you want to do more of these with us. And also thank you to you, Nick Whittaker, for answering the questions, taking the time, and you've been really thoughtful answers that you've brought forward today. And hopefully we'll have more time for questions the next time that we talk. So thank you to everybody listening and watching for sending in your questions and for taking the time to watch. Let us know your thoughts and ideas for future topics as well. But for now, that's all from us at Special Needs Jungle in Conversation. Thank you for joining us.